Hello, and welcome to today's conversation on the SaaS Convergence Zone, bridging the gap between ITAM and FinOps in the age of AI. Very excited about today's conversation. Very grateful for you all joining us today for this topic. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation for sure. This was really in response to some of the conversations and discussions we heard at this year's FinOps X event. There's no arguing that this is a very transformational time for software and technology. And it got me thinking, there are some instances where, although this is unprecedented, right, what's happened with AI, it does remind me of some instances in the past of, when everyone moved to the hyperscale cloud, or when everyone had to quickly respond to COVID and purchase apps to make sure that their companies continued to work well. There's a moment, a period where you reflect on all the change that has happened and trying to understand, okay, where are the dollars going? Are these investments good investments? And I think we're really starting to see that happen with AI as well. And in order to really rein in control and governance of AI, it really is a company-wide initiative. And I think ITAM and FinOps play a huge role in that. And we're starting to see that more and more in our client base and with prospects we talk to. So it's definitely an exciting conversation. It's an exciting time, and really, really excited to see how this all plays out. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, but also cover a few topics on the housekeeping side. So first and foremost, if you look over on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see the option to engage. In that engagement panel, you'll see a Q&A section, a chat section, as well as a poll section. We will be running a poll later in today's conversation, so we'd love your participation there. It helps us understand kind of where everyone is in this conversation, and we can cater the discussion to that. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions. We will do our best if there is an opportunity to sort of interrupt the flow of the conversation today to get the question injected, but we do have a formal Q&A session at the end of today's conversation where we can really open things up and have a dialogue with you all. So please don't hesitate to add your questions. It'll get into the queue, and we'll make sure that either we cover your question today, or if it's a more in-depth topic, that our team will reach out to you to make sure that your question gets addressed. So with all that said, let me introduce Ben Pippenger, today's speaker. Ben is a co-founder of Zylo, and he's also our VP of Strategic Partnerships here. Ben has over 20 years of experience in B2B software, including leadership roles at companies like Salesforce and ExactTarget. Ben has a deep background in SaaS management with firsthand experience helping clients navigate the visibility and control needed to control their SaaS portfolios. And he also led the development of our AI and consumption management solution here at Zylo. So he's very much focused on the future of what's happening with AI and consumption, as well as that deep background he has in license and seat-based SaaS. Ben also works very closely with industry analysts, and he really brings a broad market perspective based on the work that he does with our analysts and our clients. Ben is also very active in the FinOps Foundation, where Zylo is a member, and he's been a speaker at FinOps X. And if you didn't see his interview with theCUBE at FinOps X this year, I really recommend you take a look at it. Feel free to reach out to me, chris@zylo.com, if you'd like to get the link for that. But with all that said, I'm gonna pull Ben on stage here so he can get rolling. Ben, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Chris. Thanks for the intro. I was behind the stage there, so here we are. So let's get rolling with the presentation today. So first off, if I didn't see you at FinOps X a couple weeks ago, welcome. And if you weren't in attendance at the event, I would definitely recommend checking out. They record all the content, all the main stage keynote sessions, all the practitioner-led sessions. I would definitely recommend checking those out as they get published. I think the main stage sessions are published, but last I checked, the practitioner ones are still being worked on. So as those start to come out, I would definitely recommend taking a look at those. again, thank you for the time today. I think it's going to be a worthwhile 45 minutes or so of your time over potentially your lunch if you're on the East Coast or getting your day started on the West. The agenda that we're going to cover off on is, first, we'll talk about the changing economics of software. We're in a really time that is unlike any other as we think about how the economics of how people buy and sell software is all changing. Next, we'll dig into the visibility challenge and why it's so important that you really get as much visibility to know what's going on across your software and AI inventory. I'll talk about the convergence of, Chris talked about ITAM, but I'm really going to focus in on SAM and FinOps and really what that looks like and what we're seeing both from research perspective, but also directly inside of the clients that we work with today. I'll quickly go over 3 ways to get started if you're just setting out in this journey, and then I'll give you a peek inside Zylo. We'll spend just a few minutes looking at our application, the capabilities that we power today to help support this in the future. So let's get rolling here. So the changing economics of software. I'll talk about this really from 2 sides. And like I said, this is something that I don't think we've ever experienced before, the pressure coming at it from a buying perspective on both sides of this. It's both a technological change that's driving new pricing structures and pricing models, and the other is commercial. And the commercial side has been sort of a constant pressure that I'm sure you all have felt over the years of SaaS vendors continuing to increase prices and pushing for upsell into their base and things along those lines. So we're feeling it from 2 different angles. So we'll start with the technology side first. The foundational thing that's shifted, and I'm sure a lot of you are already feeling this, is that seat-based pricing is essentially going away, giving away to consumption-based pricing models. Now, consumption-based pricing can be multiple flavors of how companies are going to be charging you for the software that you're buying. Up here, you can see we've sort of bucketed into 3 different flavors. The first would be seat-based. So we still see this. So this still exists in the market today. I think a good example actually is Slack. Slack is still seat-based. They've baked all of their AI capabilities into the different editions that you're on. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them move away from that at some point in time as they continue to move more towards agents and agent-forward work that's happening within the Slack platform. The middle, I think, is where we're going to see a lot of B2B SaaS applications move to, and that's hybrid. So with hybrid-based pricing, what you're going to see is a pay-per-seat-based pricing unit, but there'll be some form of consumption baked into it. So you can see some examples up on the screen there. We're already seeing this transitioning happening. Just to quickly highlight Claude. I think Claude is, it's obviously been in the news a lot for the amount of money that's being spent on Claude and models that are running inside of Claude. But at the end of the day, the Claude app is a SaaS application. You think about Claude Code, Claude Chat, Claude Cowork. It's a SaaS application. You do buy seats from Claude in order to provision users access into that platform. A lot of times Anthropic is $0 those seats, so they actually don't cost anything, and it's a pure consumption model at that point based off of the tokens that are utilized by each user. But you'll see similar things from like a Zendesk where there's going to be a seat plus some sort of consumption element. Asana is the same way. Salesforce is the same way. And then over far on the right, you have your pure usage-based applications. So really, there's different ways that they structure these, but you're paying for what you're using. That could be based off of some commitment, some pre-allocated amount that you purchase. A lot of these tools are going to be more of those, what FinOps practitioners would call Cloud Plus tools. They're not your core infrastructure tools. They may be platform as a service or SaaS tools that you're also bringing in that consumption element. But there's also pure B2B SaaS apps that fit in this bucket too. An example is DocuSign that's long had consumption-based pricing. You could buy seat-based or envelope-based consumption models from them. So you'll see it across the board. So let's double click into Salesforce. You should see the poll pop up here, so feel free to answer the poll about specifically around Salesforce. I think this is just interesting. Salesforce's pricing is changing all the time. You can see up at the top of the slide, we call this consumption economics. I think if you were at FinOps X, we can call this consumptionomics if you'd like, because it's not directly tied to tokens in this case. It really is consumption pricing. And as you're thinking about your Salesforce agreements, this is pulled directly off of the Agentforce pricing page yesterday. You can see all the different ways that you can buy this. So in the first graphic there on the left-hand side, you can buy purely on a consumption basis. So you could purchase flex credits that get deployed across your Salesforce org. You can buy on a per conversation basis. You can see they have 3 different buying models you can think about. You can pre-purchase consumption. You could have a pre-commit where you're making a spend commitment with Salesforce, similar to what you see with a lot of the enterprise programs within AWS and GCP and Azure and those like. And then you also can do a pay-as-you-go model where you're purely paying for what you're using and they're billing you in arrears. On the sort of the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see where they've now incorporated that into a hybrid pricing model as well. So you have both sort of pure consumption, but you also have hybrid pricing that can exist and different editions. For instance, the Agentforce One edition, it's $550 per user per month. So this isn't cheap software by any means, but it gets 2.5 million flex credits available for your org. So let me see if I can pull up the poll results here. I'm really interested in if folks are doing this. So the question was, do you have a Salesforce consumption agreement in place today? Have you signed up for some of the stuff that they're putting in? So if you don't mind, if you can't answer the question, that would be great. It sounds like most people are saying no or they don't know. So it is still early for Agentforce. Although in their earnings call for Q1, they said that they've hit $1 billion in sales for Agentforce. So I think if a lot of the I don't knows I'm seeing come in here, like this definitely is something that you should be looking into, because just like FinOps teams have been doing for a long time, monitoring variable real-time data, you need to be doing this for your pure play B2B SaaS apps now as well, because you could end up in a situation where you run out of flex credits and business could grind to a halt, or you get into some sort of overage situation as a result of that. All right, and it's not just Salesforce that we're seeing that with. These are headlines from the past 2 months. You can see a lot of these up here are sort of about the token shock. We've run out of our budget, like Uber in the first half of the year for AI capabilities. GitHub Copilot moving their pricing model to pure consumption. And even at the bottom there, you can see some more of the pure B2B SaaS applications, Atlassian and HubSpot, making that shift from AI flat fees into some form of consumption-based pricing. I think the important thing you have to remember here, and it's maybe sounds a little obvious, but all of these platforms that you're buying, they are burning tokens, right? They're putting AI capabilities into their platforms that are leveraging LLMs in order to deliver some value to you. When they're leveraging those LLMs, they got to pay for that, right? Those are tokens that they're buying, and they got to protect their margins in this case. So a lot of times you're seeing them, transition that into some form of pricing. That could be outcome-based pricing. It could be like we saw flex credits with Salesforce. But at the end of the day, that's covering some of the costs that they're experiencing by putting those AI capabilities into their product and burning tokens in order to make that all happen, in order to protect their margins at the end of the day, and hopefully deliver value as well to you on the flip side of that. All right, so that sort of covers the technological aspect. There's new tech that's driving new pricing changes, that's completely changing the way that you buy and renew software from your vendors, and also then how you need to track that from a seat-based to consumption-based pricing. But this has not stopped either. You can see this is from Gartner's report in March of this year. The report was the SaaS slowdown will cost you. So the SaaS slowdown meaning the markets, the slowdown of the value of these SaaS companies. They're continuing that Gartner's recommending that you should expect vendors to further squeeze sticky products with price increases, push for migration to AI-enabled packages, and weaponize compliance through increased audits and new compliance issues. So you're really facing this on two fronts: the technology side, and then the commercial side, which Gartner is saying that's going to continue to ramp up as we see SaaS companies needing to improve their revenue and show margin and show revenue for their AI-based capabilities. So because of all that, we start to look at, doing SaaS management or doing software asset management previously was a lot about seats. It was a lot about how many seats did we buy, how many of those have we provisioned, are those being used or not? And that's really what we're calling here the olden days, right? So when we lived in that world, costs were fairly stable, right? You signed an agreement. That agreement was typically for 1, 2, 3 years. You sort of knew what it was. You were buying seats to these applications, and it was fairly stable over the life of that contract. Now those costs can change continuously as we move into this outcome-based, consumption-based world. It becomes a lot harder to really think about, what are our costs going to be? How much of that service are we going to use over time? The next line here, the olden days, spend was tracked to headcount. So you knew how much headcount you had. You knew, for instance, your sales team all needed a Salesforce seat. You knew what your growth plans looked like typically. fairly easy to budget based off that headcount. Now that again is changing. How do you're living in a world now where you have to budget based off of usage when you're sort of unclear on how much are we going to use? Are we going to experience spikes? Is there going to be a huge increase in adoption of these tools? Or is it going to be, a huge amount of value and our whole company wants to start using this? It becomes very difficult to sort of think about that spend and budgeting for that application over time. Olden days, vendors sold access. Again, back to those seats. They sold you access, you provision that out to an end user. Now they're monetizing usage through their AI capabilities. They're tracking outcomes and charging for those outcomes within their suite of products. And then lastly, here at Zylo, we've talked about this for a number of years, that there's really a few moments that matter with a SaaS agreement. It's your renewal and it's your true up. I'm sure there's a few others out there, but those are the two ones that you really have to think about. Like, how do we prepare for those things? Are we ready for those specific ceremonies that go on during the life of an agreement? Governance is now shifting more to what a FinOps world looks like, where you need continuous visibility, you need access to real-time data. It's variable. You need to be monitoring it and forecasting it and putting alerts and reporting against that in order to have the right governance to remove as much financial risk from your SaaS agreements as possible. So in order to get that, in order to go from the olden days to today, visibility is foundational to this. In order to really understand what's going on, you have to be able to measure, track, monitor, understand what's going on with, what I'm going to say are probably your top SaaS agreements to start with. And again, in order to make sure that you're removing some of that financial risk and exposure. So what do I mean by visibility? First and foremost, you need to understand your contracts. You understand what you've signed up for, what you purchased, how many of the things you bought, what are the key dates aligned to that agreement. All that's really important. You need to make sure you have a visibility into your spend. How much have we actually spent on this? What money has gone out the door for this application? So we know what that looks like. You need to know your usage. That's both your seat-based usage, but also your daily consumption metrics to truly understand if you're compliant with your contract, if you're going to be forecasting out beyond what you agreed to. Business ownership is critical. This is a big difference between FinOps and SaaS, is the business ownership. You've got hundreds of SaaS tools that sit out there. Who's the owner of those applications? Who's responsible for them? Who can really drive the change if change is needed in order to ensure that contract is being followed? And then allocations of your licenses, of course, that's also still very important to know what's been provisioned out to who and when. Well, one of the big challenges with getting that level of visibility is that no single team typically has that complete picture. And we're just looking at SAM and FinOps here, but I think you can also have, if you had additional columns here for your procurement team, or maybe your IT leadership team, all would probably have different parts and pieces of what's required in order to get to that level of visibility. So contracts, renewals, compliance, traditionally that's been software asset management that's been really focused on those key areas and those key data points. And FinOps teams really focusing on the more variable cost data around forecasting, analysis of consumption, and then driving cost allocation back into the products and services that you're building using the infrastructure that you're using from your hyperscaler partners. And that results in lack of visibility, right? Because it's hard to get this data. It exists in silos across your organization. And then that in turn creates financial risk. So this here is from Zylo. If you're not aware, with some of the research that we do, we put out an annual report called the SaaS Management Index. That index includes aggregated and anonymized data. It also includes a survey. And this data is from that survey. We ran it with about 200 IT leaders. And this is the feedback that they gave us around sort of what they've experienced around visibility gaps. So number one, 78% of them encountered unexpected charges tied to AI or consumption pricing. So they were surprised by a bill that they got as a result of AI and consumption pricing. 61% of them had to cut projects due to unplanned SaaS costs and increases in those costs in the last 12 months. And 79% of them encountered price increases at renewal for the next 12 months. So again, that sort of speaks to both that double-sided challenge around the economics of SaaS buying these days, with both the technology side, the surprise around these consumption costs, but then also the commercial side with SaaS vendors increasing prices on them at the renewal. So for all these reasons, this is why SAM and FinOps are really converging. I think this slide does a great job of sort of talking about what that convergence looks like. So I'm going to walk you through it real quick. On the left-hand side, you have what we've called the SAM territory. This is going to be your traditional, SAM activities, looking at your big vendors, creating enterprise license positions, driving optimization opportunities at the time of renewal, ensuring you're removing any risk from the engagement. And these tools are traditionally going to be your seat-based applications that we have said that you use to build and run the business. So these are the core B2B SaaS applications that you use to run your business on. On the far right-hand side, you have FinOps territory. So this is going to be where FinOps has really shined. This is where a lot of the practices have been built out around FinOps, a lot of the best practices, the expertise that you all have crafted over the last decade or so, all focused primarily on cloud infrastructure. So this is going to be your hyperscalers that are being used to build and run products. So different than build and run your business, build and run products. Those products could be products you're taking to market and selling commercially. They could be products that you're building to run that are then operating within your own business as well. In the middle, we have what we call the convergence zone. So this is really why we believe we're feeling this pressure and we're seeing the changes in large enterprises in order to consolidate FinOps and ITAM and SAM teams under common leadership, under common practices. And that's both the consumption SaaS. So these are still going to be tools that you're using to build and run the business. However, you're now having to use the skill sets that the FinOps teams have mastered over the course of time to properly manage these applications and manage the process and the lifecycle around these apps. And then you also have the platform as a service apps that fit in here as well. So these are going to be, again, those Cloud Plus apps that we're seeing more and more SAM teams needing to manage the process and the license allocation and some of the optimization opportunities with these platform as a service tools. And again, they're going to need sort of the FinOps teams expertise and guidance to be able to do that all. So right in the middle of there, that's where we see this convergence happening, where we see a big opportunity for both SAM and FinOps teams to come together to share how this work gets done. This particular graphic here is from a paper that's been published by the FinOps Foundation. Zylo was actually a contributor in this paper, and it was really focused on this convergence between FinOps and ITAM. And this graph or this chart really represents the main key vendors. These are going to be the vendors that you're likely spending the most with or a lot with from a vendor perspective, and highlights the fact that there needs to be collaboration here to successfully negotiate and manage these relationships. You're going to see both sort of pure consumption, you're going to see hybrid, you're going to see seat-based stuff across all of these different vendors. And it's critical that teams come together in order to properly manage these. Otherwise, there'll be blind spots and you won't really know what's going on holistically as you're working with that vendor to manage this relationship that you have with your business. So as these things you think about them coming together, really what happens, right? So you have your shared data. This is what I talked about earlier on that slide that had contracts and entitlements and your spend and your usage. You got to get that pulled together and stitch that together to make sense of it. That unlocks then shared visibility so that different parts of your organization are operating from the same playbook, understand what's going on, and can see what's happening. And because of that, that then drives shared accountability. So you think about these different groups, these different teams that are in place, that visibility with the shared data then drives that accountability, which should hopefully result in the business value that you're looking for. So gives you the ability to have better forecasting, stronger vendor negotiations, improved cost accountability, reduce your audit exposure if vendors are running audits, overall reduce your financial risk, and help remove or lessen any sort of AI app or SaaS app sprawl and redundancy across your application stack. So how do you do this? How do you make this all come together? I think, this probably sounds great. You're probably like, hey, Ben, that sounds awesome. But, our organization is very complex. We work, teams are all over the place. Our leadership isn't, maybe ITAM and SAM report up to different leadership than FinOps. I think that's okay, but you need to really start thinking about how you transition into a model that can support what we're talking about here. So you can see here, this is sort of showing siloed teams across SAM, FinOps, security, finance. You could add procurement to this list as well. You really need to be moving towards a unified SaaS and FinOps model. How do we need to be thinking about this? How do we need to bring all this data together that these individual siloed teams are managing in order to build the next step, which are shared practices where we're working together? The quote down there is from that same report that the FinOps Foundation put out. So meaningful progress happens when teams shift from protecting remit to pursuing shared outcomes. And that's so true. And I think now is the time to make that happen within your organization, or a lot of that business value will come to fruition, I guess, in the end. So again, that's great, Ben, but help me understand that a little bit better. How do we get to that point where we have this shared operating model and shared work streams? I think if you are a FinOps practitioner, I think there's a crawl, walk, run approach to this that you can take. I think the main thing that's important here is not everyone needs to get to unified, and unified means same leadership. It could be the same person that's doing both, maybe separate practices under the same leader within an organization. I think that's great if you can get to that point, but can be unrealistic for a lot of organizations. So really in the middle, I think is where you need to get started. So siloed, you have separate teams, separate goals. It's just not going to work. You need to bring these two practices together. The data needs to be shown. The skills need to be shared across the teams. And you get into sort of more of a coordinated scenario where you are working together, you're collaborating a little bit. You're talking about what's going on. Maybe you're sharing some reports back and forth. And then into collaborative, I think a lot of organizations will probably get to collaborative, and that'll be great. Where you have shared planning, you have shared goals, you have shared OKRs across your teams, and maybe different leaders, but maybe they report up to the same executive up at the top. But collaborative is, I think, most important to focus on right now. And then, potentially down the line, we could get to a point where we see sort of broad unification of these practices. I think that's going to take a little time to get there, but we are seeing that within some of our client base already, where we have the FinOps teams that are taking on software asset management as well. So it is happening. But I think a goal, if that's not something your organization is moving towards, get to collaborative as quick as you can. Okay, so 3 ways that you can think about starting today. So the first one really comes back to that visibility. You need to really think about how you build that shared data foundation. Look at those different data points. How do you start to pull those together? They do need to be sort of stitched together. So it's not you just have the data and it just works, because you need it. It needs to be up to date. You need to be looking at it on a regular basis to really understand what's going on across the software that you're buying and how you're using it and how you're consuming it. Together with the different teams, you need to review your AI and consumption spend. Forecast before costs become surprises. Your FinOps counterparts, if you're not a FinOps practitioner, has been doing this for a long time. They've been thinking about forecasts and consumption as it relates to hyperscaler agreements. There's a lot of skill sets that you can leverage, a lot of things that we can learn from each other as you're approaching this and looking at that spend data together. And then create a joint vendor governance motion. So when you think about those moments that matter, when you think about tracking your forecasts, when you think about anomalies or alerts that go on as a result of a spike or something that's occurring that you didn't expect, build the bridges in order to have shared responsibility and shared accountability to track those things and tackle them. Okay, so I'm going to spend the next couple minutes. I'm going to hop into a quick demo in Zylo just to show you what it looks like and how we, number one, bring that data together, how we're showing you, seat-based plus consumption applications within a common view. And I'm going to quickly touch on allocation and cost allocation. I think it's a fun feature just to highlight, especially for those teams that are doing that today within their organization. All right, so you should see Zylo here. Let me go ahead and log in. So I'm logging into this is a demo instance of Zylo. We call it Cloud. It's populated with a bunch of data that we make up and put into the system just so you can see the capabilities and the power of our platform. So first and foremost, as I log into the system, you can see you're presented with a dashboard. This dashboard is going to cover all of the applications that you have in the system. That's going to be your seat-based stuff. That's going to be just your platform stuff. That's going to be your consumption apps as well. You'll see insights that are available right on the bat. So redundant functions, we're showing security scoring, all that good stuff is available directly within the dashboarding. You can see new apps that have been added, spend data. So again, we're trying to give you that full picture, that full visibility. Refresh real quick here, see if that consumption apps grid will load. Full visibility to what's happening across your SaaS stack. I'm going to pop over to the applications grid here. And from here, this is going to be your full view of every app that we have, all the data we have. This is where you get that full visibility that we've been talking about. This particular report we're looking at is top-down, highest spend to lowest spend applications. You can see what provision usage looks like. You can see information like your next contract renewal date, all that stuff. You can build automations and build a learning off of within the system to build a true renewal operationalization process for your company. I'm going to pull up Claude here and take a look at the data that we have inside of Zylo tracking Claude usage. So for Claude, we're hooking directly into Anthropic's APIs. As a result of that, we're pulling down consumption data. We're pulling down spend data. We're pulling down usage data. I've also loaded a contract in here so you can see contractual information. So again, stitching all that data together to drive that visibility, and then as a result, create that accountability across your business. So at the top, you can just see high-level stuff around payments, usage. I can see what my costs have been from a consumption perspective. Over on the contracts tab, you can see contract, which was uploaded by our contract assist agent that brings the data in, automatically populates it into Zylo for you, so you can see what you purchased, what your contractual spend is for those type of agreements. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on the cost tab here. So typically how Anthropic works with Claude and for their enterprise agreements is they're signing a spend-based commitment. So you're committing to a certain amount of annual spend with Anthropic. That spend happens as a result of your end users burning tokens. So those tokens could be happening from end user use of chat, co-work, or Claude Code. It could also happen through use of their API. So if you're engaging directly with Anthropic in order to use one of their models to power something within your product, that can also account towards your spend commitment. There's also ways that you can have agreements set up where if you're using Anthropic through AWS Bedrock or the like, that also can contribute to your overall spend commitment as well. So that's typically how they're setting up their agreements. So really what we're helping out with here is we want to show you, okay, how much of that agreement have you spent against? So in this case, you can see we spent 1.375 million or just about against our agreement in the last 12 months or since it started in October. Zylo, we have embedded forecasting directly into the product. So it uses historical data. It accounts for seasonality year over year and provides you with a projected cost. So we're projecting you're going to be at 2.319 million. The commitment agreement that's been set up is $2 million. So you're going to be over, we're projecting by $319,000. So that is going to be fees that you end up having to pay if you do go over that much. So it's a good heads up, like, hey, there's a chance that you're going to have to go find more budget to afford or pay your bill from Anthropic. This can all be built. You can create automations off all this stuff, so you can be notified as soon as we see something happening, either whether it's based off the forecast or actuals or an anomaly that may be occurring within the system. Down below that, you can see a graph that's showing you your overall actual costs versus what our projection looks like, as well as your commitment line there. So you can see, in about September, you're going to be through that $2 million commitment. So you're going to have to find more budget here to cover your costs for the rest of the year. All this data has a bunch of different dimensions you can run it by as well, which you can see in the chart down here. So you can look at it by workspace, by model, by product, by user, department, service tier, token type. So I'm just going to click on user here so you can see this as well. So this would be individual users that are burning tokens. So this would be them using Claude Chat, Claude Code, Claude Co-work, and what the resulting spend looks like for those users. Give it a second here to load on me. Not sure why it's doing this. So let me refresh here. I'm not sure what's going on. Well, if this does not load, I will definitely follow up with a GIF afterwards to you all that can show you the capabilities. There we go. So you can see here, in this example, you have Anthropic's API. This would be charges related to the API. So if you're using Anthropic's API to leverage their models, below that, you can see all the different users. So this is going to show you the top 9 or 10 users, what their spend looks like. Down here, I can see Scotty's our top highest spending user of Claude. I can break it down into the different spend variables. So I can see in May, he sort of went crazy here, $15,000. I can click into that and get to the raw individual, what we call activity records, but these are the costs that were charged based off his usage. So you can see, how much it spent, the cost type, the model that was used, the product that it was used against. So you can see he's using Claude Code quite a bit, which is where a lot of those charges are coming from. So it allows you to dig into the details and really understand, hey, what's up with Scotty? Why is he using this much? Is this something that we need to plan for? Is this something that is an anomaly? We need to go ask Scotty what's going on. That all sits side by side with all of our normal seat-based stuff. I'm not going to go into that too much right now, but I will show you cost allocation really quick. So with cost allocation, essentially what we're doing is we're looking at both seat and consumption-based allocation of how people are using products, and then helping you create chargeback or showback reports for your business to run on. So I'm going to use Zoom for this case. So we'll pull up Zoom here. I'm going to use this one. And the first thing you get to do here is there's a configuration screen. So most organizations have their own way. They want to think about how do we want to calculate cost per user. This gives you a lot of options for how you want to build that out. So you can change essentially the math that goes on, defining the user count, defining the costs that we're looking at. You can even turn on and off individual line items from the contract that you want to be included in those costs, as well as expense payments if you want to include those or not. So that's all configurable as you set up cost allocation for an individual app. So you can see in this case, we're looking at cost per user is $457. On the showback report then, as we're pulling in usage data, we're also pulling in HR roster data that allows us to then allocate that cost back to an individual department, cost center, whatever you want to bring into the system. So you can then see, okay, what are each individual costs look like? You can see both the provision users as well as the cost of those inactive users. So a good way to think about, why do all these folks in development have access to Zoom when $15,000 of them are inactive users in the system? So that's just a quick high-level overview. I could spend a lot of time demoing Zylo, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of how we are sort of stitching this data together and the capabilities that we unlock as a result of that data to help you really put governance, remove risk, and hopefully save some money at the end of the day. I'm going to flip back over to my deck here and just give you some couple final takeaways here. We'll jump over into some Q&A here in a second, but I think the most important thing is that the economics of software is definitely changing. And again, it's changing on those two fronts. And I don't feel like it's anything that we've seen before from a software perspective. We've been doing this for 10 years, and this is the most change I think we've experienced. So you're not alone if you feel a little shell-shocked or looking for guidance here. We're definitely here to help you along that way. The convergence between SAM, ITAM, and FinOps is giving organizations the visibility and governance needed so that you can respond to AI cost growth and vendor pressure. So you have to bring those two things together in order to respond to that. And this convergence is really the driving force behind it. And then you need to get in place where you have this shared data that drives shared accountabilities, that hopefully shared outcomes that you're looking to achieve with whatever program you're putting in place. So Chris, I'll hand it back over to you real quick.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Ben. And thanks for a great summary. And thank you to all, everyone who participated in the polls, but also the chat here. We do have some questions that we'll get to very shortly. But before we go there, Ben, if we want to move to the next slide, I just wanted to share with the team, just last week, Gartner released its 2026 Magic Quadrant for SaaS management platforms. We're very honored and grateful to be in the leader quadrant, furthest right for the completeness of our vision. And really, right now, Zylo's focus is helping enterprise organizations understand what's happening with AI. And as Ben shared, we are very much focused on pulling that data together with the traditional seat and license-based SaaS to give a full picture for what's happening across the entire software portfolio. One of the things I'll mention in the report is Zylo is the only leader that is cited specifically for our customer experience as one of our core strengths. And it really is our engagement with our clients that we look to understand what's happening and how we can help our clients get control of all the changes that are happening in their portfolios. So thank you so much for the engagement. And if you haven't received a copy of this report, please reach out to me, Chris at Zylo, and I'll be sure to make sure you get a link. But I believe everyone who's on today's webinar should have received a link from Zylo on Tuesday, either from myself or from Michael in our client marketing team. So moving on to the next slide, just wanted to cover a little bit around next steps. Our team will proactively be reaching out to you, whether you're an existing Zylo client or if you're a prospective Zylo client, with a copy of the recording. a link to the recording, as well as answers to any questions that come up that we can't address today on the call. And then we're also going to be sharing a report that we recently published, which is our 6 key stats for FinOps leaders in 2026. If you're more on the IT side, we'll share the IT version of that as well, so you have access to it. But this is data that insights that we've pulled from Zylo's data, which is that aggregated set of over 3 trillion in spend now. So some great insights for both FinOps and IT teams. However, if you at any point have questions or you want to engage, one of my favorite parts of my job is engaging with our clients and our prospects. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me. My email is chris@Zylo. If you have any follow-up questions or you need connected with an expert here, I'm always available, and I make that a priority. So with that said, we will move on to some questions here. Ben, there were quite a few questions related specific to Zylo and sort of some functionality of our application. But one of them was, with all this changing happening in billing and pricing, does Zylo have plans right now of changing our billing and our process here? And I think right now the short-term answer is no. Right? We were looking to kind of the traditional seat-based model for Zylo. But I don't know if there's any additional context you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you that aren't familiar with our pricing model, we price essentially based off of the number of knowledge workers in your organization. It's more of a platform fee versus a seat fee. It's not necessarily an access. Here's a seat, and this is how much it costs. It's a high level how we do it. We've recently, added a lot of AI features into our platform, including the ability to automatically upload a contract, and our AI will scrape everything out for you. We also have added AI search capabilities, so you can use natural language to search. And most recently, we've added a new feature called Clarity in our MCP server. So Clarity is our in-app AI-driven chat, where you can ask questions that'll provide you reporting, all that good stuff based off the data in your account. And MCP is so you can use Zylo data inside of your own instance of whatever AI tool that you like to use. So we have a broad suite of AI capabilities into the platform. As of right now, there's no plans to move to any sort of consumption model for any of those. Those are all included as part of our platform fee. And so that's where we sit today. So.
Thanks, Ben. Erica had a couple questions here. I'll get to them one at a time. So when you were showing the graph of we were taking the Anthropic and Claude example, where you're showing the spend chart or the cost chart, that is relevant to the question was, so is this graph showing all spend, APIs, chat, etc.? That graph, correct, is specifically all the data that's available from the API. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's all spend. So it'd be all spend for whatever connected instance of Anthropic that we've connected into. So that would include spend as a result of using their API to initiate a model, but it would also include any spend that's happening as a result of a user using the Claude application on their machine or however they're using it. So it'd be all spend.
Excellent. And then, yeah, cost allocation is not part of the core platform. That is correct. The cost allocation is in the premium platform. But I just wanted to confirm that for you, Erica, your question there. Scott asked, I assume we can use workflow features to notify the user when they are getting near a threshold of usage?
Yeah, so you can set up you should be able to, if you want to set up a per user threshold, that may be not quite there yet, but that is something that I know teams are doing. I've heard about organizations wanting to set up a per user threshold. Right now, it is sort of an aggregated number. So if you're looking at it from an aggregated perspective, you can look at the previous day and what spend looks like. But at the per user level, I know that's something the team is working on.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ben.
Yep.
Another one here. What are we seeing is the most unmanaged AI spend today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a couple things. So I guess you can think about that a couple different ways. We're seeing a lot of shadow AI. So in that SaaS Management Index report, the number one most expensed app last year was ChatGPT. That was the first time that it was the number one most expensed app. OpenAI spend was also included in that list as well. So we're seeing a lot of sort of rogue employee-led purchasing happening around AI tools. I think sort of on the flip side of that is what's sort of out of control spend. That's going to be what you're looking at probably mostly from like Anthropic, Claude Code, Codex, those tools that are being used by engineering teams in order to build and write code, right? So those I think are the ones that we've seen, and you've seen in the news too, where there's just been a increased amount of spend that's going towards those tools. And I think a lot of people are asking, well, what's the value as a result of that? How do we know that, hey, we blew our budget, what did we get for that? I think that's sort of the next phase of this, is how do we track, and this is a very FinOps related concept, right? How are we tracking the value related back to that spend that we had for those consumption-based tools?
Excellent. Thank you for that, Ben. We're at time here today. If there are any other questions, feel free to share them. We'll see if we can squeeze one or two in here, but I think we've covered what came in during the conversation. Really appreciate the back and forth here that we had in the chat and the engagement, and really appreciate the time for everyone who joined here today. As I shared, we will be following up with the recording, but please reach out proactively. I've dropped my email in there, and if you have any questions or you need any additional context, please do not hesitate to reach out. I'll make it my top priority to get back with you. Great. Have a great day, team. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time.